There comes a moment in every life, a silent, almost imperceptible moment, when the world seems to pause. The noises fade. The endless chatter of daily existence grows distant, like a faint echo from another room. And within that sudden stillness, a question arises. Not loud, not aggressive, just persistent. Why am I here? Some hear this whisper early, as children lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, sensing there's something more beyond the walls of their bedroom. Others hear it later, during heartbreak, loss, or while gazing at a sunset that feels too beautiful to be accidental. For a few, it comes like a thunderclap, shattering illusions in one blow. For most, it comes slowly like water eroding stone. This book was written for that question, for that whisper that never leaves us. For you, we live in an age where information floods our senses from every direction. Science gives us data. Religion offers dogma. Social media provides distraction. But very little in our modern world teaches us how to sit with the mystery, how to embrace the unanswered questions without rushing for shallow conclusions. This is not just a book. It is an invitation to journey inward, into the depths of your consciousness, through the great halls of philosophy, the dimly lit corridors of ancient texts, the uncharted territories of spiritual experience, and the vast cosmic landscapes described in the Urantia Book, the Hermetic teachings, and the Gnostic scriptures from Nag Hammadi. This is for the thinkers, the feelers, the wanderers, the wounded, the awakening, the restless ones who look up at the night sky and feel both insignificant and infinite at the same time. If you're still reading these words, then perhaps you are one of them. Perhaps you are ready. The chapters ahead will not spoon-feed you answers. There will be no spiritual shortcuts here, no 5 steps to happiness or 3 secrets of the universe. Instead, you will be challenged to think, to feel, to doubt, to believe, to surrender. We will walk together through the timeless questions that have haunted and inspired humanity. What is consciousness? Is there a purpose to suffering? What lies beyond death? Can reason and faith coexist without conflict? Who or what is God? We'll explore ideas from Socrates to Jung, from the Stoics to the Sufis, from quantum physics to the teachings of Christ and Krishna, and yes, from the mystical pages of the Urantia Book, which offers perhaps one of the most audacious cosmologies ever written. But this won't be a dry academic exercise. Philosophy here will not be reduced to abstract theories. Spirituality will not be dressed in vague platitudes. Every page will pull you closer to something visceral, something real, something alive. The goal is simple, to help you remember what, deep down, you already know. Because that's the paradox of every great spiritual and philosophical journey. We're not really learning something new. We're remembering something ancient. Something buried beneath years of conditioning, fear, and forgetfulness. Something essential. Before we begin, take a breath. Seriously, right now, inhale deeply and exhale slowly. Feel your body. Feel the weight of this moment. Feel the curiosity that brought you here. You didn't find this book by accident. Or maybe the book found you. Either way, let's begin. Let's step together into the vast unknown. The sacred space where philosophy and spirituality intertwine, where mystery is not a problem to be solved, but an experience to be lived. Are you ready? Throughout human history, 2 paths have often seemed to run parallel, occasionally crossing, but more often kept apart as if by some ancient agreement: philosophy and spirituality. Philosophy asks us to question, to dissect, to analyze. It is the path of the mind, of logic, of intellectual rigor. It taught us how to reason, how to debate, how to seek clarity in the face of confusion. Spirituality, on the other hand, invites us to feel, to surrender, to trust in what cannot be measured. It is the language of the soul, the longing for transcendence, the ache for reunion with something greater than ourselves. For centuries, scholars and mystics stood on opposite shores of the same river, shouting at each other across the waters. "Where is your proof?" cried the philosophers. "Where is your faith?" replied the mystics. But maybe the time has come to build a bridge. That is the true intention behind this work. What if these two paths were never meant to be separate? What if reason and intuition are not enemies, but lovers, each incomplete without the other? What if logic can lead us to the edge of the infinite, and surrender can give us the wings to cross over? In these pages, you'll encounter arguments that stretch the mind and stories that stir the heart. We'll walk with Socrates through the streets of Athens, sit with Buddha beneath the Bodhi tree, stand beside Christ as he speaks of the kingdom within, and soar with the thought adjusters described in the Urantia Book, guiding humanity from unseen realms. We'll enter the dusty caves where the Nag Hammadi manuscripts lay hidden for centuries, unearthing their cryptic Gnostic poetry. We'll trace the invisible threads of the Hermetic teachings, where ancient Egyptians and Greek philosophers once whispered about the unity of all things. We'll touch the edge of quantum fields, where modern science begins to sound suspiciously like Eastern mysticism. And throughout it all, we'll keep returning to one sacred task: to remember who and what we truly are. This is not about choosing sides. It's about dissolving false boundaries. In this book, you are free to question and free to believe, free to doubt and free to feel, free to wrestle with paradox and sit in awe before mystery. Each chapter will flow into the next like rivers merging toward an unseen ocean. The ideas will challenge you. The metaphors may unsettle you. And that's exactly how it should be. Transformation is not comfortable. Awakening is not neat. Truth rarely comes dressed in certainty. But one thing is certain. By the time you reach the final page, you will not be the same person who began this journey. So, let us proceed, not as teacher and student, but as fellow travelers. Let us navigate this winding path where philosophy and spirituality walk hand in hand toward the same luminous horizon. The question is no longer, why am I here? The better question might be, who am I becoming? Chapter 1. The oldest question. Who are we? Some questions echo through time like ancient bells ringing in the corridors of human consciousness. Among them, one rises above all others, persistent, unyielding, and strangely familiar. Who am I? It's a question that doesn't belong to any single culture, religion, or philosophy. It is woven into the DNA of every sentient being who has ever paused long enough to contemplate their own existence. We ask it as children, looking at our reflection for the first time. We ask it as adolescents, standing at the edge of identity and expectation. We ask it again as adults, when life's routines fail to satisfy our deeper hunger. And often, we ask it most urgently in moments of crisis, when the carefully constructed walls of our persona begin to crack. But where do we turn for answers? The philosophers of old were among the first to stare this question in the face. Socrates, wandering the streets of Athens with relentless curiosity, made questioning the self his life's mission. His famous declaration, "Know thyself," wasn't a casual suggestion. It was a spiritual imperative. For Socrates, self-knowledge was not a luxury for intellectual elites. It was the foundation of a moral and meaningful life. Centuries later, René Descartes, trapped in the fog of radical doubt, stripped away every belief he once held true until only one certainty remained. Cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Yet, Descartes' conclusion, while groundbreaking for Western philosophy, was still tethered to the intellect, to thought as proof of being. It would take later philosophers like Immanuel Kant to challenge and expand this notion, introducing the idea that reality itself is shaped by the mind's structures of perception. Kant taught us that we don't perceive the world as it is, but as it appears to us through the filters of space, time, and causality. In other words, we do not simply exist. We perceive existence through a lens crafted by consciousness itself. But even Kant stopped short of answering the deeper, more mystical side of the question. If perception shapes reality, who or what is the perceiver? In the centuries that followed, philosophy would continue to wrestle with this mystery, but psychology would offer new tools that delve not just into thought, but into the tangled webs of emotion, memory, and the unconscious. Enter Carl Gustav Jung. Where Freud saw pathology, Jung saw myth. Where Freud dissected dysfunction, Jung illuminated archetypes and the collective unconscious. Jung introduced the world to the concept of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming one's true self. Not the ego, not the social mask, but the integrated whole, light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, human and divine. According to Jung, within each of us lies a deeper blueprint, a seed of potential waiting to unfold. The journey of life, then, is not merely about survival or social success. It's about realizing that seed, becoming whole. And isn't that, in its essence, the same call heard in ancient philosophy? The same whisper Socrates heard on the streets of Athens? The same hunger that drove Descartes to doubt everything but his own awareness? The same longing that moves countless souls today to seek beyond the material? But even with the insights of philosophy and psychology, the question lingers. Is the self merely a psychological construct, a series of thoughts, a bundle of experiences encoded in neurons? Or is there something more? Some traditions answer with a resounding yes. In the ancient Upanishads, the sacred texts of India, the sages wrote, Tat tvame se, you are that, meaning, the self within you is not separate from the ultimate reality. The Atman, individual soul, and Brahman, universal spirit, are one. The Tao Te Ching, written by Laozi, speaks less in direct answers and more in poetic paradoxes. Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. And then, in the heart of the Christian tradition, the words of Christ cut through centuries with surgical clarity. The kingdom of God is within you. But perhaps one of the most audacious and cosmic perspectives on this question come from a lesser-known, yet deeply profound text, the Urantia Book. Unlike traditional religious scriptures or philosophical treatises, the Urantia Book presents a complex, layered cosmology of existence. Within its nearly 2,000 pages, it offers an astonishing proposition. You are not an accident. You are not a mere collection of biological processes or psychological patterns. You are a unique, unrepeatable personality, a direct gift from the Universal Father. According to the Urantia Book, personality is a bestowed reality. It is not created by evolution. It is not a product of matter. It is given, singular, eternal in potential. You, as you are utterly unique in the universe. The Urantia text suggests that while your body, your mind, and even aspects of your identity will change, evolve, and eventually dissolve, your personality, your essential you-ness, remains a constant thread across lifetimes, dimensions, and cosmic ages. It speaks of an indwelling presence called the thought adjuster, a fragment of divine consciousness that dwells within the human mind, silently guiding, witnessing, and partnering with us in our spiritual evolution. This adjuster is said to be the voice behind the whisper, the quiet knowing beneath the noise, the source of our deepest yearnings for truth, beauty, and goodness. So here we are, standing at the intersection of philosophy, psychology, ancient wisdom, and cosmic revelation. Socrates urges us to question. Descartes reminds us that thought signifies being. Jung invites us to integrate. The Upanishads declare our oneness with the Absolute. Laozi calls us to inner wisdom. Christ points us inward toward the kingdom. And the Urantia Book unveils the cosmic dignity of our personality and the divine partnership unfolding within us. In the end, the question, who am I, is not one we answer once and for all. It's a question we live, a mystery we embody. And as we move forward, chapter by chapter, perhaps the more meaningful inquiry is this: am I ready to remember? The challenge with identity is that it's fluid, shifting from moment to moment, molded by circumstance, culture, memory, and mood. This morning you may identify as a professional, a parent, a student. By afternoon, as a friend, a lover, or a seeker. By nightfall, perhaps as a soul in quiet crisis, questioning everything you thought you knew. We build layers, social roles, belief systems, personal narratives. They become our mask, our public self, the face we show the world. But under all of it, who remains? Carl Jung warned us of the dangers of over-identification with the persona, the social mask we wear to navigate life. The persona is necessary for survival, for belonging, for communication. But when mistaken for the true self, it becomes a prison. For Jung, individuation was the way out of that prison, a sacred process of integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of our psyche, embracing both the light and the shadow, owning our desires and fears, our strengths and wounds. To individuate is not to become perfect, but to become whole. And that process often begins with a kind of existential discomfort, a gentle but persistent inner friction. You start to notice the career that once felt fulfilling now feels empty. The relationships that defined you no longer nourish you. The beliefs you clung to for safety begin to crumble. This is not failure. It is awakening. Philosophy, too, acknowledges this restlessness. For Kant, the very act of questioning reality was a sign of maturity in human reason. He challenged humanity to move beyond childish dependency on external authority and into a stage of autonomous thought, a process he called Aufklärung, or enlightenment. But Kant also admitted that some things lie beyond reason. Two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe, he wrote: the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me. The Upanishads echo this inner moral compass, reminding us that ultimate reality is not found in external rituals or intellectual debates, but within the inner self, the Atman, described as pure consciousness, timeless, and indivisible. Similarly, in the Tao Te Ching, Laozi advises, knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. These texts, across continents and millennia, converge on one central point. True identity is not something we create, but something we uncover. Yet perhaps nowhere is this idea more beautifully articulated than in the Urantia Book's concept of personality. According to Urantia cosmology, your personality was designed and gifted by the Universal Father, the first source and center of all reality. It is unchanging, unique, and eternal in potential. This is a radical shift from both Western materialist psychology and even some Eastern non-dual philosophies. You are not an illusion to be dissolved. You are not a random product of neurochemical accidents. You are not just a transient wave in the ocean of consciousness, destined to merge back into anonymity. No, you are a distinct personality, capable of eternal growth, cosmic service, and intimate relationship with the divine. And yet, paradoxically, this uniqueness does not separate you from others. In the grand cosmology described in the Urantia Book, each personality exists within a larger tapestry of interconnection, a cosmic family bound by shared origin and ultimate destiny. Individuality and unity are not opposites here. They are complementary truths. Just as a single note holds its place within a symphony, you hold yours within the unfolding music of the universe. So, what does all this mean for your daily life? It means that your doubts matter, your longings matter, your suffering matters, your joy matters. Every experience, no matter how mundane or painful, is part of your individuation, your spiritual evolution, your preparation for the vast journey that awaits you beyond this life. You're here to grow, to remember, to choose, to partner with the fragment of God dwelling within you, the thought adjuster, whose only mission is to guide you home. And perhaps that's why the question of, who am I, never fully leaves us. Because each time we ask it, we peel back another layer. And with each layer removed, we get closer, not to a final answer, but to a living relationship with the mystery itself. So pause just for a moment. Feel the gravity of your own existence. You're a question that God Himself has asked and is still answering through you. And as we step forward into the next chapter, we'll explore another facet of this journey. The role of suffering, not as punishment, but as invitation. Chapter 2, the problem of suffering and the meaning of existence. There are moments when suffering enters our lives like an unexpected storm, without warning, without mercy, and often without apparent reason. Loss, illness, betrayal, loneliness, existential emptiness. In those moments, a haunting question inevitably rises. Why? Why does suffering exist in a universe that speaks so often of love, beauty, and cosmic harmony? If there is a divine source, a God of goodness, how can pain and tragedy coexist with such a presence? This is not a new question. It is perhaps as old as consciousness itself. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer built much of his philosophical legacy around this very dilemma. In his eyes, suffering wasn't an occasional visitor in human life. It was the underlying fabric of existence. For Schopenhauer, desire was the root cause. We want what we don't have. When we get it, we fear losing it. And when we inevitably lose it, we suffer again. He described life as a pendulum swinging between pain and boredom, with fleeting moments of satisfaction in between. It's a bleak view, but one that resonates with anyone who has felt trapped in cycles of longing and disappointment. Yet, while Schopenhauer offered a diagnosis, he offered little remedy beyond the philosophical resignation to fate. Thousands of years earlier, another thinker, one who would later be called the Buddha, confronted the same problem, but from a different angle. Siddhartha Gautama's Four Noble Truths became one of humanity's earliest structured attempts to address suffering at its core. 1. Life contains suffering, dukkha. 2. Suffering arises from attachment and desire. 3. There is a path to the cessation of suffering. 4. That path is the Eightfold Path, a way of living ethically, mindfully, and with right understanding. Buddha didn't offer promises of a suffering-free existence. He offered tools for liberation from suffering's psychological hold. Where Schopenhauer gave us philosophical despair, Buddha gave us practical, transcendence. Centuries later, in the midst of one of history's darkest chapters, another voice would rise, this time from the heart of a Nazi concentration camp. Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote his masterpiece, Man's Search for Meaning, testifying that even amidst unimaginable suffering, humans retain one last freedom: the power to choose one's attitude. Frankl observed that those who survived, emotionally and spiritually, were often those who found meaning in their suffering, however small that meaning might be. Whether it was thinking of loved ones, holding on to a future goal, or maintaining dignity in the smallest of acts, meaning became a psychological and spiritual lifeline. Frankl's philosophy echoes through time as a powerful counterpoint to both Schopenhauer's pessimism and passive resignation. But beyond philosophy and psychology, there exists yet another layer, a spiritual perspective on suffering that transcends intellectual analysis. What if suffering is not just a cosmic accident or the result of flawed human nature? What if suffering has purpose, hidden, obscure, often cruelly veiled, but real nonetheless? Across countless spiritual traditions, suffering is framed not as punishment, but as a catalyst for evolution. In the Christian Gospels, Christ himself is portrayed as the man of sorrows, bearing pain not for the sake of punishment, but for the redemption of humanity. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna's existential despair on the battlefield becomes the doorway to Krishna's teachings on duty, detachment, and spiritual awakening. In the Upanishads, suffering is seen as the friction that breaks the illusion of separateness, pushing the soul toward realization. Suffering humbles the ego. It collapses false identities. It burns away superficial attachments. In a language of spiritual alchemy, suffering is the fire that purifies the gold. And then there's the cosmic lens provided by the Urantia Book. According to Urantia teachings, our world, Earth, or Urantia as it's called, is not a random, godless experiment. Rather, it's a planet marked by a history of rebellion and spiritual isolation. Our suffering, in many ways, is described as the byproduct of living in a world that has yet to fully align with cosmic truth. The Urantia Book does not sugarcoat our pain. It acknowledges the reality of injustice, disease, and moral chaos. But it frames these conditions as temporary and educational. This life, with all its trials, is part of a much larger curriculum, a cosmic school in which each soul is given the opportunity to choose growth, courage, faith, and love in the face of adversity. Every sorrow is a teacher. Every loss is a recalibration. Every obstacle is a spiritual weight training exercise, building muscles we will one day need on higher planes of existence. The adjuster within, our personal fragment of the divine, is not passive during these times. It is active, working in the background, transforming each experience into material for our eternal growth. The Gnostic texts of Nag Hammadi add yet another layer to this tapestry. For the Gnostics, suffering on earth is intimately tied to the fall into materiality. They speak of a primordial forgetfulness, a cosmic amnesia in which souls, once dwelling in realms of light, descended into the dense and deceptive world of matter. This fall wasn't necessarily a punishment, but part of a larger drama. A narrative where the soul must awaken from illusion, remember its divine origin, and struggle upward through layers of ignorance and suffering to reunite with the source. The Gnostic Gospel of Thomas whispers, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This teaching aligns powerfully with the Urantia concept that within each of us dwells a divine presence, urging us, guiding us, nudging us toward awakening, no matter how dark the night. So what do we do with all this? Philosophy teaches us to question. Psychology teaches us to observe. Spirituality teaches us to transcend. The Urantia Book teaches us to trust the process. The Gnostics teach us to remember. Maybe the better question is no longer, why do I suffer? But rather, what is this suffering trying to awaken in me? We will all face pain, but what we do with that pain, how we transmute it, how we let it carve new depths within us. That is where meaning is born. And as we continue, the next chapter will take us deeper into another timeless dilemma. The nature of reality. Is life an illusion, or is there a cosmic purpose behind it all? To fully grasp the transformative potential of suffering, we must be willing to reframe the narrative we've inherited. For much of human history, suffering was seen purely as punishment, a result of sin, karma, or cosmic displeasure. Generations were taught to endure pain with resignation, often believing they were at the mercy of forces beyond their control. But what if this is only a fragment of the larger story? What if suffering, rather than being a sign of divine abandonment, is actually one of the most intimate ways the universe calls us back to ourselves? From a spiritual lens, suffering is often described as the Great Awakener. When life flows smoothly, when comfort wraps around us like a warm blanket, it's easy to fall asleep to deeper truths. We drift through routines. We numb ourselves with distractions. We build our identities around things that are ultimately temporary: job titles, possessions, social roles. But suffering, unwanted and often violent in its arrival, breaks the trance. Suddenly, the things we thought were permanent reveal their impermanence. We're stripped bare, naked before the mystery. And in that raw space, transformation becomes possible. The Urantia Book offers a particularly compassionate and cosmic view of this process. It suggests that our earthly struggles are neither random nor malicious, but are an essential part of soul building in a universe designed for growth. It speaks of a concept called supreme evolution, the idea that personal and cosmic evolution require experiential learning. Pain, disappointment, and struggle serve as spiritual sandpaper, refining us, challenging us, and ultimately preparing us for the next phase of our existence beyond this world. According to Urantia teachings, God does not will our suffering, but God does use our suffering, turning even our darkest moments into stepping stones toward greater spiritual maturity. The universe operates on laws of cause and effect, free will, and natural consequences, but the divine presence within us, the thought adjuster, works tirelessly to extract growth and wisdom from even the most chaotic circumstances. Every loss becomes an invitation to discover deeper love. Every betrayal becomes an opportunity to cultivate discernment and forgiveness. Every failure is a doorway to humility and resilience. We are not being punished. We are being shaped. The Gnostic texts take this idea even further, framing suffering within the context of cosmic forgetfulness. According to Gnostic cosmology, humanity's root suffering stems not just from external events, but from a primordial disconnection from Source. We have forgotten who we are. The physical world, to the Gnostics, is a realm of illusion, a dense field where the divine spark within us lies buried beneath layers of matter and ignorance. The fall described in many Gnostic writings was not about moral sin, but about ontological dislocation, a metaphysical exile from our true spiritual home. This is echoed in passages from the Gospel of Truth, a Gnostic text found at Nag Hammadi. Ignorance brought about anguish and terror, and the anguish grew solid like a fog so that no one could see. Yet even in this fog, the Gnostics taught that salvation, or more accurately, Gnosis, direct knowing, was possible. Suffering, in this view, becomes both a symptom of our disconnection and a trigger for our awakening. Pain reminds us that something essential is missing, that our lives, as currently constructed, are not the full picture. Across traditions, whether philosophical, psychological, or mystical, the pattern is clear. Suffering cracks the shell. It disrupts the ego's illusion of control. It exposes the soul to new possibilities. But suffering alone does not guarantee growth. It is our response to suffering that defines its transformative power. We can choose bitterness, or we can choose wisdom. We can collapse into victimhood or rise into conscious evolution. We can numb ourselves, or we can lean into the discomfort and ask, what is this pain teaching me about myself, about life, about the universe? The Urantia Book encourages this courageous inquiry. It speaks of the courage of faith, the spiritual audacity to trust that even in suffering, we are being guided towards something larger than we can currently perceive. Similarly, the Gnostics believe that within each moment of darkness lies the hidden seed of light, waiting for the right conditions, the right choice, the right awakening. And when that awakening happens, when we look suffering in the eye and refuse to let it define us, something shifts. We begin to move from reaction to response, from despair to meaning, from victim to co-creator. As we leave this chapter behind and step into the next, keep this truth close. Suffering is not the end of your story. It may, in fact, be the place where your most authentic journey begins. In the next chapter, we'll explore an even more provocative question. Is reality itself an illusion? Or is there an underlying purpose woven through every moment of existence? Chapter 3. The nature of reality. Illusion or purpose. Reality. A word we use casually, as though its meaning were self-evident. We wake up, brush our teeth, go to work, laugh, cry, fall in love, suffer loss, all within the invisible container we call reality. But how real is reality? And perhaps more importantly, what is it? This is one of the most confounding and timeless questions ever posed by human consciousness. It's a question that has perplexed philosophers, mystics, and scientists alike. The philosophical dilemma. Is reality an objective truth or a subjective construction? The 18th century philosopher George Berkeley took a radical stance. Reality exists only insofar as it is perceived. His famous dictum, esse est percipi, to be is to be perceived, shook the foundations of Western metaphysics. For Berkeley, the world does not exist independently of our perception. A tree falling in the forest with no one to hear it? It simply doesn't fall. Or perhaps it doesn't exist at all. The mind, for Berkeley, was not merely a filter for reality. It was the very source of reality's existence. Yet, this raised troubling questions. If reality is perception-dependent, then whose perception sustains the universe when no human observer is present? Berkeley's answer, God. According to him, the divine mind perceives all things at all times, ensuring the continuity of existence even when no human eyes are watching. Then came Immanuel Kant, offering a philosophical middle ground. Kant argued that while there is indeed a noumenal reality, a reality that exists independent of us, we can never access it directly. All we ever experience is the phenomenal world, reality as it appears to us, filtered through categories of human perception like space, time, and causality. Kant didn't deny reality's existence. He simply questioned our ability to ever know it in its pure, unfiltered form. In doing so, he forever changed the way philosophers approach the nature of being. Fast forward to the 20th and 21st centuries, and thinkers like David Chalmers reignited the debate, this time through the lens of consciousness studies and philosophy of mind. Chalmers introduced what he called the hard problem of consciousness. It's one thing, he argued, to explain how the brain processes information or how neurons fire in response to stimuli. It's quite another to explain why those processes produce subjective experience. Why do electrical impulses give rise to the color red, the taste of chocolate, the pain of loss, or the joy of love? Chalmers raised an unsettling possibility. Consciousness may be fundamental to the universe itself, not a byproduct of matter, but perhaps a prerequisite for matter to exist meaningfully at all. And here, philosophy begins to blur into something that sounds suspiciously like mysticism. Because while Western philosophers were wrestling with mind-body dualism and materialism, ancient traditions like Hermeticism had long been offering a different answer. The all is mind. So begins the Kybalion, a modern distillation of ancient Hermetic teachings. In Hermetic philosophy, the universe itself is understood as a mental construct held within the infinite consciousness of the all. Matter, energy, space, and time are all secondary manifestations, vibrational patterns within the field of universal mind. To exist, then, is not to occupy physical space, but to participate in the divine thought. This Hermetic axiom finds surprising resonance with both Berkeley's idealism and Chalmers' speculations about consciousness as fundamental. But the Hermeticists go a step further. They invite us to participate in this divine mind, to become co-creators, conscious agents shaping reality through intention, focus, and spiritual alignment. The power of thought, they say, is not metaphorical. It is the very fabric of creation. The Nag Hammadi texts, discovered in Egypt in 1945, offer yet another lens through which to view reality, not as a fixed creation, but as an emanation. In Gnostic cosmology, reality unfolds in layers, descending from the ineffable source, often called the monad, through various spiritual eons, finally solidifying into the dense material realm. According to the Apocryphon of John, a key Nag Hammadi text, the material world was shaped by a lower, ignorant deity, often referred to as the demiurge, who, blinded by arrogance, fashioned a world disconnected from the fullness of the true source. For the Gnostics, this world is both real and illusory. It exists, but it is a shadow of the higher realities. Our task, they said, is not to reject reality outright, but to pierce through the layers of deception, awakening the divine spark buried within us. Reality, then, is a school of remembrance, a maze we navigate to reclaim Gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of the source. Then comes the cosmic vision of the Urantia Book, offering perhaps the most expansive, detailed cosmology ever attempted in spiritual literature. For Urantia readers, the universe is not an accident, nor is it a deception. It is a living, purposeful system filled with countless worlds, civilizations, and orders of celestial beings, all orchestrated by an intelligent, loving first source and center, God the Father. Reality, according to Urantia, is progressive and educational. What we perceive as random, meaningless, or cruel is, in fact, part of a vast cosmic curriculum, our planet. Urantia is described as a decimal planet, a kind of experimental laboratory where new forms of life and consciousness are explored. Every experience here, every joy and every sorrow, is part of a larger plan aimed at soul growth and spiritual ascension. Urantia teaches that reality has 7 levels, ranging from the material to the spiritual, and that every mortal being is invited to climb this ladder, step by conscious step, toward union with the divine. Matter, mind, and spirit are not separate substances, but interrelated expressions of a unified cosmic purpose. The physical universe is the stage. Human experience is the script. Personality is the actor. And God is both the author and the ultimate audience. So, is reality an illusion? Or is it the unfolding of a cosmic dream where each of us plays a crucial role? Perhaps it is both. A dream and a school. A test and an invitation. A veil and a window. The truth, it seems, lies not in choosing one narrative over another, but in weaving them all together. Philosophy sharpens the mind. Mysticism awakens the heart. Science offers tools for observation. And faith allows us to step forward even when the path is hidden. As we turn the page to the next chapter, we'll go deeper still, exploring the nature of consciousness itself. What is the soul? The ego? The spirit? Where does one end and the other begin? Reality has always been both our canvas and our enigma. We live inside it, breathe it, shape it with our choices, and yet we rarely pause to question its true nature. The human mind, restless and inquisitive, keeps returning to the same question in countless forms. Is this world we perceive truly real, or is it some kind of grand illusion woven to teach, test, or perhaps even deceive us? Centuries of philosophy have struggled with this dilemma. Even today, with the towering achievements of science, the fundamental question remains unsettled. Where empirical measurement ends, speculation begins, and in that space, between what is observable and what is unknowable, human consciousness stands, searching for meaning. In recent decades, quantum physics, with its disorienting revelations about the nature of matter and observation, has started to sound almost poetic, almost mystical. Scientists now speak of entanglement, non-locality, and observer-dependent phenomena. Reality at the smallest scales appears less like solid matter and more like probability, intention, and perception dancing in unpredictable patterns. What was once dismissed as superstition now returns, dressed in the language of quantum theory, pointing toward a universe far stranger than classical materialism ever dared imagine. And yet, long before quantum mechanics, the Hermetic philosophers were already speaking of such things in their own language. The all is mind, declares the Kybalion, echoing from antiquity through the dim corridors of time. They taught that the universe itself is a mental construct, a thought held within the infinite consciousness of the divine. Matter, energy, and even space and time are but lower vibrations of this universal mind, perceived by us as solid and external, but in truth, flowing from a singular, unknowable source. As strange as this idea may sound to modern ears, it begins to find surprising resonance with both the philosophical idealism of Berkeley and the metaphysical implications of Kant. Reality, in these views, is not a neutral, objective arena separate from the observer. It is, at least in part, participant-dependent. Perception, observation, and consciousness are not merely lenses through which we see reality. They may well be the tools through which reality itself is shaped and maintained. In the dusty caves near Nag Hammadi, ancient Gnostic scribes left behind yet another perspective on this eternal question. Their texts whisper of a reality that was never meant to be fixed or ultimate. For the Gnostics, the material world was not the final act of creation, but a byproduct, a dense emanation, one or more layers removed from the true source. They speak of eons, emanations of divine intelligence, cascading downward until, at some point, something fractured. The demiurge, an ignorant and arrogant creator, shaped the material world without full knowledge of the spiritual realities above him. As a result, the world we inhabit is a mixture of beauty and distortion, light and shadow, a spiritual training ground wrapped in veils of forgetfulness. But the Gnostics did not call us to despair. Their central teaching was that within each human being burns a divine spark, a remnant of the higher realms. Though reality here may seem opaque, it holds clues, symbols, and moments of piercing clarity meant to awaken us. Every experience of beauty, every instance of love, every longing for truth is a thread leading back to that lost origin. And then comes the vast cosmology of the Urantia Book, expanding the conversation from the personal and philosophical to the cosmic and eternal. The Urantia revelation speaks not of a random universe, nor of an accidental materiality, but of a purposeful, living system where every particle and every being exists within a divine architecture of intention. Reality is portrayed as a layered process, an ascending ladder where matter, mind, and spirit interact in a cosmic dance of becoming. In Urantia's vision, even the perceived randomness of life on Earth is framed within a larger educational journey. Our world, this decimal planet called Urantia, is part of a grand experiment, a unique setting where the boundaries between material and spiritual realities are explored with uncommon intensity. The struggles we face here, the confusion, the suffering, the glimpses of beauty, all of it is part of a design intended not to punish but to teach. According to this cosmology, we are each invited to participate consciously in the unfolding of reality itself. Our thoughts, choices, and spiritual longings are not trivial background noise to some indifferent universe. They are essential threads woven into the larger tapestry of cosmic evolution. Reality is described not as a fixed object, but as a living, breathing, and growing phenomenon, evolving through the experiences and decisions of conscious beings like you and me. So, is reality an illusion or a purpose? Perhaps it is both. Perhaps the illusion is necessary, a veil that gives us space to grow, to choose, to reach for something more. Perhaps reality bends itself around our consciousness, offering just enough resistance to provoke awakening, but never so much that the path back to the source becomes unreachable. And perhaps in asking this question, we do what humanity has always done. We participate in the universe's own journey of self-discovery. We mirror the cosmos by seeking to know ourselves, just as the cosmos unfolds itself through us. As we step forward into the next chapter, the question will shift from the nature of reality to the nature of the self. Where does consciousness truly reside? What is the soul, the ego, the spirit? And how do these layers intertwine in the ever-deepening mystery of existence? Chapter 4. The Mystery of Consciousness, Soul, Ego, and Spirit. There are moments in life when we pause, not because we choose to, but because something within us demands it. A silence falls over the mind, and suddenly we become aware that we are aware. In that instant, a question surfaces, gentle yet unrelenting. What is this observer within me? It's a question that stands at the heart of philosophy, psychology, spirituality, and even modern neuroscience. Who is it that watches thoughts arise and dissolve? Who is it that feels, remembers, dreams, fears, loves, and questions its own existence? For centuries, thinkers have tried to map the landscape of consciousness, to chart the boundaries between mind and soul, ego and spirit, body and awareness. Yet with every answer comes a new layer of complexity, a deeper fold in the fabric of being. Descartes, standing at the dawn of modern philosophy, introduced us to dualism, suggesting that reality is divided into two distinct substances: residential extensa, matter, and residential cogitans, mind. The physical world, he argued, is governed by mechanistic laws, while the mind exists in a separate, non-material realm of thought and experience. His famous declaration, cogito ergo sum, became a cornerstone of Western thought. The self exists, at least, as a thinking entity. But Descartes' solution, while elegant in its time, opened a philosophical wound that remains unresolved. How can two fundamentally different substances, mind and matter, interact? How does the immaterial influence the material? How does thought shape neurons? And how do neurons produce thought? Later thinkers began to question whether this dualistic split was itself an illusion. Spiritual monism, ancient yet ever relevant, arose from traditions both East and West, suggesting that all is one, that matter and mind are simply different expressions of a single, underlying reality. In the Advaita Vedanta of India, consciousness is the only true substance. The material world is Maya, a shifting, impermanent appearance within the boundless ocean of Brahman. The mystics of the Tao Te Ching would say that form and formlessness dance together, inseparable as yin and yang. And in the words of the Hermetic teachings, as above, so below, as within, so without. Separation, it seems, is a necessary illusion, an experience through which consciousness comes to know itself. Modern psychology, too, has ventured into these waters, especially through the work of thinkers in the transpersonal psychology movement. Abraham Maslow, known for mapping human needs, reached the peak of his famous hierarchy with self-transcendence, acknowledging that the fullest realization of the human being occurs not at the level of ego, but in moments when the ego dissolves into something larger. Stanislav Grof, pioneering in altered states of consciousness, described experiences where individuals report contact with dimensions of existence far beyond personal identity. In transpersonal states, people often experience not only the dissolution of ego boundaries, but also the overwhelming sense of unity with all life, sometimes encountering archetypal beings, life forms, or a deep, all-encompassing intelligence. These experiences challenge the reductionist view that consciousness is a mere epiphenomenon of brain chemistry. They hint at something more, something vast, intimate, and enduring. Yet perhaps one of the most profound models for understanding the multidimensional self comes from the Urantia Book, with its concept of the thought adjuster. According to Urantia cosmology, each person is indwelt by a literal fragment of the universal Father, a pre-personal, non-material presence that serves as both guide and silent witness. This adjuster does not impose its will, but works quietly, suggesting, inspiring, and constantly drawing the individual toward truth, beauty, and goodness. The adjuster is described as a perfect pilot, dwelling within the imperfect vessel of human mind, patiently navigating the soul through the challenges of material existence. It speaks in intuitions, sudden clarity, moments of conviction, and a quiet moral compass that persists even when the ego resists. Unlike the ego, which is shaped by survival instincts, cultural conditioning, and social programming, the adjuster represents the voice of eternity, whispering within the chambers of the temporal self. This concept brings a staggering implication. We are never truly alone in consciousness. Even in isolation, depression, or confusion, There is always another presence observing with us, reaching for us, waiting for the moment when we will finally choose alignment with our highest destiny. The Gnostic texts, buried for centuries and now recovered from Nag Hammadi, echo this inner companionship in their own symbolic language. They speak of the higher self, the divine spark buried beneath layers of ignorance, and the pleroma, the fullness of divine reality from which we originally came. In the Gospel of Thomas, we find a haunting reminder. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. This is the spiritual drama playing out in every life, the tension between egoic fragmentation and the call toward wholeness. The false self clings to its illusions of control and separation. The true self listens for the quiet pulse of the infinite, calling it home. Perhaps this is why we sometimes feel two voices within us: the voice of fear, doubt, and smallness, and the voice of love, faith, and transcendence. One belongs to the ego, the other to the spirit. Our task is not to destroy the ego. Without it, we would have no interface with the world. But neither can we let it rule. The ego is a useful tool, but a dangerous master. The goal is integration, a conscious partnership where ego serves the soul's higher intentions, and the self becomes a vessel through which the adjuster's whisper can manifest into action, compassion, and creation. In the end, consciousness is not something we have. It is what we are. And at the deepest level, even that is not the full truth. We are both the questioner and the question, the observer and the observed, the finite personality and the eternal fragment of God, reaching toward reunion with the source from which we came. As we move to the next chapter, we'll follow this trajectory upward, stepping into the question that inevitably follows. If we are evolving beings, born of matter but drawn towards spirit, where are we going? What is the destiny of the soul beyond this life, beyond this world? Let's continue. Chapter 5, The Soul's Journey, From Material to the Cosmic. There's an old story whispered across time and civilizations about beings trapped in darkness, souls chained by illusion, mistaking shadows for reality. It is the story of all of us. Plato's allegory of the cave, presented in his seminal work, The Republic, remains one of the most powerful metaphors for the journey of the soul from ignorance to illumination. Imagine, as he described, a group of people born and raised in a cave, facing a wall, seeing only shadows cast by objects passing before fire behind them. For them, those shadows are reality. They have no reason to question what they see. But one day, one prisoner is released. As he stumbles toward the light, at first blinded and afraid, he realizes that everything he believed to be true was but a pale reflection of a much greater reality outside the cave. The sun dazzles him. The world expands. Truth, once inconceivable, becomes undeniable. And yet, the journey doesn't end there. The enlightened prisoner feels a duty to return to the cave, to awaken the others. But as Plato warns, those still chained in darkness often resist the truth. They are comfortable with their illusions. They mock the one who speaks of a higher reality. Some even become violent toward those who threaten their familiar world. The allegory speaks not just to philosophy, but to spiritual awakening. Leaving the cave is not a one-time event. It is a continuous process, each layer of awakening revealing another, deeper layer still hidden. Throughout human history, countless myths and spiritual traditions have echoed this pattern of awakening, often expressed through the archetype of death and rebirth. The ancient Egyptians told the story of Isis and Osiris, where Osiris is dismembered and scattered, only to be reassembled and resurrected through the devotion and love of Isis. The pieces of the god, once fragmented, become whole again, symbolizing the soul's journey from chaos back into divine order. In Greek mythology, Dionysus undergoes a similar cycle. The god of ecstasy and transformation is torn apart by the Titans and later reborn, representing the indestructibility of life, the necessity of suffering for transcendence, and the regenerative power inherent in the cosmos. And at the heart of Christian tradition, the story of Christ stands as the ultimate narrative of death and resurrection, not merely as a historical event, but as a symbolic map for each individual soul. The crucifixion represents the death of the ego, the surrender of the old self. The tomb holds the stillness, the in-between space where transformation brews unseen. And the resurrection is the awakening, the rising of consciousness into a new state of being, forever altered, forever expanded. These stories, though separated by geography and culture, speak a universal language. They tell us that before any true spiritual ascent, there must first be a descent into darkness, into confusion, into the unknown parts of the self. The journey to higher consciousness requires the willingness to let die whatever no longer serves our evolution. But myth and metaphor, as powerful as they are, remain incomplete without a lived, experiential path. It's here that the teachings of the Urantia Book provide a sweeping cosmological framework that brings clarity to the soul's journey, not just within one lifetime, but across cosmic ages. The Urantia revelation introduces us to the plan of ascension, a divinely orchestrated pathway where each soul progresses through multiple levels of existence, each more refined and spiritual than the last. Earth, Urantia, is but the starting point, the cradle of beginnings. After physical death, the soul, now fused or in preparation to fuse with its thought adjuster, awakens on the mansion worlds, the first of many progressive spheres designed for educational, moral, and spiritual rehabilitation. These worlds are not abstract heavens, nor are they places of eternal judgment. They are schools of being, lovingly administered by celestial caretakers, where each soul continues its journey of learning, healing, and growth. From there, the soul continues through higher spheres, Urantia worlds, where material existence gradually gives way to more spiritualized forms of consciousness and identity. The journey stretches outward through vast universes, super-universes, and finally, for those who persist in faith and choose divine will at every crossroad, toward paradise itself, the center of all creation, the dwelling place of the Universal Father. Unlike many spiritual traditions that speak of salvation as a final, one-time event, Urantia portrays salvation as an eternal unfolding, a lifelong, life-after-life process of conscious partnership with God, where personality survives and evolves, forever expanding its capacity to experience truth, beauty, and goodness. But the climb from material to the cosmic cannot occur passively. It requires engagement, intention, inner work. It demands that we become participants in our own evolution, not mere spectators hoping for rescue. The first steps of this journey begin here, now, on this very earth, with practices that awaken and sharpen consciousness. Practices that teach us how to turn our attention inward, how to observe without judgment, how to open to the subtle whispers of the thought adjuster already dwelling within. If the soul's journey is inevitable, its pace is not. The rhythm of awakening is deeply personal, shaped by choices, intentions, and the often unpredictable alchemy between grace and effort. While the universe provides the framework, it is the individual who must decide how fully and how consciously they will engage with their own evolution. Awakening does not require dramatic gestures or public declarations. Often, it begins in silence. In the unnoticed moments when we pause, breathe, and ask ourselves, am I truly present in this moment? The first and perhaps most foundational practice for conscious awakening is self-observation. This is more than mindfulness as a passing trend. It is a radical commitment to becoming the witness of one's own thoughts, emotions, and reactions. In the words of Gurdjieff, another voice in the lineage of awakening, the greatest tragedy is to live life in a state of waking sleep. Self-observation breaks the spell. Through observing our thoughts without judgment, we start to see the ego's patterns, the defensiveness, the attachments, the narratives we replay endlessly. And in that seeing, a small but significant gap emerges between the observer and the observed. That gap is the first crack in the shell of unconsciousness. Another powerful gateway is contemplative inquiry, inspired by both Eastern traditions and Western philosophy. Asking questions, not to find immediate answers, but to live inside them. Questions like, who is thinking this thought? Where does this emotion arise from? What is the source of this desire? These inquiries turn our attention back toward the source of awareness itself. Meditation, in its many forms, becomes the training ground for this deeper seeing. Whether seated in silence, focusing on a breath, engaging in prayer, or simply observing the flow of sensations through the body, meditation helps us step back from the noise of the mind. Over time, we begin to identify less with the content of consciousness and more with the spacious awareness that holds it all. From the perspective of the Urantia Book, these moments of stillness and reflection create openings for the thought adjuster to make contact. The adjuster does not shout. It does not impose. It waits for stillness. It speaks in the language of intuition, of sudden clarity, of the quiet moral nudges that often go unnoticed in the rush of daily life. In these moments, when the mind grows quiet and the heart grows open, the adjuster's influence becomes more pronounced. The teachings of Urantia emphasize that the partnership between human personality and the divine fragment is built on consent. The adjuster waits for the individual's willingness, for the sincere invitation to collaborate in the inner work of soul growth. Dream work, too, can become a tool for awakening. Jung often spoke of dreams as messages from the unconscious, carrying symbols and archetypes that speak the language of the soul. By paying attention to dreams, journaling them, reflecting on their patterns, we begin to uncover the deeper conversations our own psyche is trying to have with us. Yet awakening is not limited to meditative or contemplative practices. Sometimes, it is through acts of love and service that consciousness expands most naturally. Moments when we step outside our egoic concerns to truly see and serve another human being. These are sacred acts of alignment with the higher will. In Gnostic tradition, service and Gnosis go hand in hand. The recognition of the divine spark within ourselves inevitably leads to the recognition of that same spark in others. True knowledge is never separate from love. To awaken is to realize our interconnectedness, not as a concept, but as a living truth. Another essential practice is gratitude, not as mere positivity, but as a deliberate act of perceiving the sacred within the mundane. The Urantia teachings often emphasize the cultivation of faith and trust in the goodness of the universe. Gratitude shifts our internal frequency, making us more receptive to spiritual guidance, more attuned to the adjuster's gentle leading. Finally, the path of awakening calls for courage. To see oneself clearly is no small task. To face shadow aspects, to dismantle cherished illusions, to surrender control. These are acts of spiritual bravery. But every small step in this direction amplifies our capacity for light, for wisdom, for love. The journey from the material to the cosmic is not a leap. It is a series of awakenings, each one building upon the last. It is the process of dying to the false self and being reborn into fuller dimensions of truth. We don't need to wait for some distant afterlife to begin this journey. It starts here, now, with the next conscious breath, the next moment of presence, the next choice to act from love rather than fear. And as we move forward into the next chapter, we will dive into those ancient teachings that sought to protect this knowledge. The mystery schools, the Hermetic codes, the hidden paths of the Gnostics, all of them guardians of a wisdom humanity was never truly meant to forget. The call has always been there. Perhaps now, we are finally ready to answer. Chapter 6, Hidden Wisdom, Hermeticism, Gnosis, and the Ancient Mysteries. There has always been knowledge meant for the few, not out of arrogance, nor to hoard power, but because certain truths require a level of inner readiness. To approach them prematurely risks misunderstanding, or worse, distortion. Across civilizations, in temples and caves, within sacred groves, and behind locked doors, ancient seekers gathered in silence to study the nature of existence. These were the custodians of hidden wisdom, guardians of what came to be known as the mystery traditions. One of the most enduring voices from this lineage comes from the Hermetic teachings, said to have originated in ancient Egypt under the guidance of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great. The Hermetic philosophy, later compiled in texts like the Corpus Hermeticum and distilled in the Kybalion, presents a universe that is far from mechanical or random. It is a living, breathing, intelligent field governed by universal principles that shape everything from the motion of galaxies to the patterns of human thought. Among these principles, a few stand out as timeless keys. The principle of mentalism tells us that the all is mind. Reality is a manifestation within the universal consciousness. Every event, every experience begins first as thought. The principle of correspondence, captured in the well-known phrase as above, so below, as below, so above, reminds us that patterns repeat across levels of reality. The microcosm reflects the macrocosm. The movement of stars echoes within the human heart. The principle of vibration teaches that nothing rests. Everything moves. Everything vibrates. Even what seems solid and unmoving is, at its core, energy in motion. The principle of polarity suggests that apparent opposites, light and dark, good and evil, love and hate, are simply extremes of the same continuum. Understanding this allows the seeker to find balance and transcend duality. The principle of rhythm highlights that all phenomena have their tides, their cycles of rise and fall, of expansion and contraction. Life breathes, and so must we. The principle of cause and effect asserts that nothing happens by chance. Every action generates a consequence, visible or invisible. And finally, the principle of gender, which speaks not only of biological sex, but of the masculine and feminine energies flowing through all things, constantly seeking balance. To study these principles is not merely to acquire intellectual knowledge. It is an invitation to observe the world differently, to perceive connections where before there seemed only randomness, to recognize patterns behind apparent chaos. But while the Hermetic teachings offer a framework for understanding the structure of reality, they stop short of personal encounter with the divine. They describe the mechanisms, the laws, the architecture, but what about the direct experience of God? This is where Gnosis enters the conversation. Gnosis, unlike dogma or doctrine, is not information. It is transformation. It is not belief in God, but knowing God intimately, experientially beyond words. The ancient Gnostics, whose voices were nearly silenced by history, spoke of the divine not as an external ruler, but as a living presence within. To know the divine was to awaken to the spark buried beneath the layers of ignorance and illusion, to reclaim one's true origin in the pleroma, the fullness of divine light. Their writings, especially those discovered in Nag Hammadi, reveal a path of inner awakening, of peeling back the veils one by one, through contemplation, self-inquiry, and a radical turning inward. They saw the material world as a complex playground of both deception and invitation, a place where the soul, though trapped in layers of forgetfulness, could awaken through insight, suffering, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Yet access to this knowledge was not automatic. The Gnostics believed that each soul had to earn its way back through direct experience, not by proxy. This was not about memorizing scripture or performing rituals. It was about becoming. The theme of initiation threads through many of the mystery schools of antiquity, from the Eleusinian mysteries of Greece to the secretive Orphic rites and later, the esoteric paths of the Rosicrucians. At Eleusis, initiates would undergo rites symbolizing death and rebirth. The exact rituals remain hidden to this day, but the essence is clear. Participants were led through a symbolic descent into darkness, followed by an ascent into light. The experience was said to dissolve the fear of death, revealing the eternal nature of the soul. The Orphics taught of the soul's divine origin and its fall into material existence, emphasizing purification and discipline to prepare for eventual reunion with the divine. The Rosicrucians, emerging centuries later, blended Christian mysticism with Hermetic science and alchemical symbolism. They spoke in riddles, encrypting spiritual truths within allegory, symbols, and coded language. But behind their secrecy lay the same essential invitation: awaken the inner eye, transcend the limitations of the ego, and remember your divine heritage. All these traditions, though diverse in form, point to the same inner journey, a path marked not by external belief, but by inner transformation, a pilgrimage not to distant lands, but to the hidden chambers of the heart and mind. And yet, for all their beauty, these ancient paths were often accessible only to the few, the initiated, the prepared, the chosen. But what if the time for secrecy has passed? What if the age we now live in demands a different kind of access to spiritual knowledge, one not limited to mystery schools or closed societies, but open to every sincere seeker willing to do the inner work? For most of history, spiritual knowledge was guarded behind veils of symbolism and selective initiation. The ancient teachers understood that truth, when handed to unprepared minds, could lead not to liberation, but to distortion. There was a sacred order: first purification, then study, then experience, and finally, wisdom. Yet as humanity evolves, the gates to this hidden wisdom begin to shift. The very conditions that once required secrecy are dissolving. The collective consciousness is changing. What was once reserved for the few is now being made available to the many, but with one essential condition: the seeker must still do the inner work. This is where the Urantia Book enters as both continuation and revolution within the spiritual narrative of humanity. Unlike the mystery schools of the past, the Urantia revelation does not present truth as something to be hidden or coded in allegory. It lays its cosmology, theology, and spiritual psychology openly before any reader willing to engage with it, but it does so with a unique and profound disclaimer. Understanding is not granted by mere reading. It must be earned through experience, reflection, and personal spiritual striving. The knowledge in the Urantia Book is not secret in the traditional sense. It is self-protected by the inherent difficulty of fully grasping its depth without genuine inner readiness. The language is complex, the concepts layered, the cosmology vast. But for those with patience, sincerity, and an earnest hunger for truth, the book becomes a map, a cosmic curriculum for spiritual ascent, where the Gnostics emphasized secret knowledge as the key to awakening. Urantia shifts the focus toward personal relationship with the divine as the true gateway to illumination. The thought adjuster, the divine fragment indwelling each human mind, is not an external initiator, nor a distant teacher in some esoteric order. It is the ever-present inner guide, accessible in every moment of sincere reflection, moral choice, and loving action. The initiation is not ceremonial. It is existential. It is found in the decision to choose truth over convenience, love over fear, faith over doubt. Each choice, however small, becomes part of the curriculum of the soul. The Urantia cosmology honors the ancient mysteries but redefines their access points. The soul no longer needs to pass through literal temples or secret rites. The new temple is the human mind, where the adjuster speaks. The new rite of passage is faith in action. The new mystery school is life itself, in all its beauty and brutality. And yet, for all its accessibility, the path remains demanding. Intellectual curiosity alone will not unlock the doors of higher understanding. Urantia's revelation makes it clear. Spiritual insight is born of living experience, moral struggle, sincere seeking, and above all, personal communion with the Universal Father. The ancient mystery schools trained the few to hold the light for the many. Today, the light is being placed directly in the hands of each individual with the universal call, come and see, but be prepared to change. As humanity stands at this evolutionary threshold, a new kind of initiation is unfolding, not administered by priests or gurus, but orchestrated by the divine presence within. The tests are daily. The lessons are continuous. The rewards are transformational. The Hermeticists spoke of universal laws. The Gnostics sought hidden knowledge. The mystery schools protected sacred truths. And now, the invitation is personal. The journey from seeker to knower, from student to experiencer, is open to all who are willing to surrender not only their ignorance, but also their pride, their attachments, and their resistance to change. This is the hidden wisdom of our time, that the gate to the infinite lies not in distant temples or forgotten manuscripts, but within the human heart, waiting for the next brave step toward awakening. And with this realization, we turn to the next movement of this journey, the practical art of inner mastery. How do we, in the midst of ordinary life, begin to embody the principles we've now glimpsed? How do we bring the philosophy of the cosmos into the choices of everyday existence? In the next chapter, we will explore this terrain, the practical philosophy of spiritual awakening, where ancient truths meet the responsibilities of the present moment. Chapter 7, The Inner Kingdom, Philosophical Spiritual Practices for Self-Knowledge. There is a place no map can show, no telescope can find, and no scientist can measure. It is closer than breath and more expansive than galaxies. It is the inner kingdom, the hidden domain where thought, emotion, intuition, and spirit converge. Throughout history, the greatest minds and hearts have turned their attention inward to explore this kingdom, not through abstract speculation, but through practice, through daily, intentional acts of inner observation, reflection, and communion. For the Stoic philosophers, life itself was the training ground of the soul. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and reluctant philosopher, sat by candlelight in military camps and royal chambers alike, recording his thoughts in what would later become known as the Meditations. These writings were never intended for publication. They were personal dialogues with himself, a way to clarify thought, cultivate virtue, and steel his spirit against the inevitable trials of life. Aurelius would ask himself, am I acting according to nature? Am I letting external events disturb my inner peace? What part of this suffering is real, and what part is my interpretation? The Stoics believe that we are not disturbed by events, but by our judgments about events. They urge the practitioner to distinguish between what is within their control and what is not, to accept the flow of life while mastering the response to it. This practice of philosophical meditation is not unlike the mindfulness techniques taught today. It is the deliberate act of pausing, observing one's own thoughts, questioning assumptions, and aligning action with deeper values. But the Stoics stopped short of describing the soul's divine connection. For that, we must turn to the language of contemplative spirituality. Where philosophy sharpens the intellect, spiritual contemplation softens the heart. It invites us to move beyond analysis into presence, beyond judgment into witnessing. To practice spiritual self-observation is to watch the mind, not to control it, but to see it as it is. Imagine sitting quietly, breathing naturally, and simply noticing. Noticing the rush of thoughts, the flicker of emotions, the sensations in the body, and more importantly, noticing the silent awareness beneath it all, the part of you that observes without reacting. This practice, simple in theory yet profound in its effect, creates a new internal vantage point. The ego's dramas, once overwhelming, begin to seem less absolute. Emotional storms pass more quickly. Reaction gives way to response. Over time, something shifts. The space between stimulus and response grows wider. And in that space, freedom is born. This inner witnessing echoes the wisdom of countless traditions, from the Vipassana practices of Buddhism to the Christian practice of centering prayer, to the Gnostic call for inner stillness, and into the Urantia teaching of inner communion with the adjuster. The Urantia Book, in particular, offers an intimate vision of what happens within this inner space. It describes how the thought adjuster, that silent, divine presence indwelling the human mind, uses these moments of stillness to communicate, inspire, and guide. Yet this communication is not verbal. It's not dramatic. It doesn't appear as flashing visions or booming voices. It comes as gentle intuition, sudden clarity, moral conviction, or a quiet inner assurance that defies explanation. The Urantia revelation emphasizes that the adjuster speaks most clearly when the mind is calm, focused, and willing to listen. Inner silence is not emptiness. It is the open field where divine impressions can land and take root. To sit in this kind of silence is to create a sacred space where transformation can occur, not because we force it, but because we allow it. This is why prayer, as described in the Urantia Book, is more than petition. It is communion, a two-way opening where the soul reaches upward in sincerity and the divine reaches downward in grace. But prayer is not magic. It does not bend cosmic laws to human will. Instead, it bends human will toward cosmic harmony. To pray is to align, to synchronize the frequency of one's heart with the larger currents of truth, beauty, and goodness flowing through the universe. And it is in this merging of philosophical inquiry, spiritual contemplation, and silent prayer that the true art of self-knowledge begins. While philosophical meditation, spiritual contemplation, and prayer cultivate the soil of inner awareness, there remains a vital dimension: practice. Knowledge without application is like light stored in a box, untouched, unrealized, wasted. The journey of self-knowledge demands embodiment. It is not enough to think differently. We must learn to be differently. The following practices are not rigid formulas. They are invitations. They do not promise instant enlightenment. But over time, with sincerity and consistency, they can reshape the very contours of consciousness. Begin with the morning reflection. Before the noise of the world invades your mind, sit in stillness, even if only for 5 minutes. Breathe deeply. Feel the weight of your body against the earth. Then ask yourself 3 simple questions. 1. What kind of person do I choose to be today? 2. How can I serve others with love and presence? 3. In what moments will I pause to remember the divine within me? This practice, though deceptively simple, aligns your consciousness with intention before unconscious patterns have the chance to take control. As the day unfolds, engage in micro moments of awareness. Pause between tasks. Before opening an email, making a phone call, or entering a conversation, take a single conscious breath. Feel it fully. Use this breath as a reminder. I am here. I am awake. I choose how I meet this moment. The Stoics would call this philosophical vigilance. The Buddhists might name it mindful presence. The Urantia Book frames it as opening a space for adjuster guidance. Next, experiment with the evening inventory. Before sleep, sit quietly with your journal or simply in reflection. Revisit the day not with judgment, but with curiosity. When did I act from love? When did I act from fear? Where did I ignore the quiet prompting of my higher self? Where did I listen? This practice trains the mind to notice patterns and invites the adjuster to work more intimately with you during sleep. Another powerful tool is active imagination, borrowed from Jungian psychology, but deeply aligned with the Urantia model of inner dialogue. In a quiet state, visualize yourself sitting across from a figure representing your higher self. Whether you imagine this as light, a wise elder, or simply an undefined presence. Speak your questions aloud or inwardly. Then listen, not for literal answers, but for impressions, images, feelings that arise spontaneously. Trust that the thought adjuster often speaks through such symbols, guiding your inner journey. Engage also in sacred reading. Choose passages from the Urantia Book, the Stoics, the Gnostics, or other sacred texts that resonate with your current stage of growth. But do not read for information alone. Read as meditation. Let the words settle. Allow them to speak to a deeper layer within you. Finally, embrace silence as a daily ritual. At least once each day, set aside 5 to 10 minutes for absolute stillness. No requests, no affirmations, no mental activity beyond open, receptive presence. This is the space where the adjuster moves most freely, where insights arrive unbidden, where the soul remembers its place in the vast symphony of the cosmos. You don't need exotic locations, elaborate techniques, or spiritual credentials. The doorway to self-knowledge is always here, waiting for your next breath, your next choice to turn inward. In practicing these simple, sacred acts, you become both student and teacher of your own consciousness. You cultivate a relationship with the self beneath the self. You lay the foundation for the deeper transformations yet to come. And as we step into the next chapter, this journey of inner awakening will meet its inevitable counterpart, the dialogue between science and spirit. How does modern discovery echo ancient wisdom? Can neuroscience, physics, and cosmology walk hand in hand with the path of the soul? The answers await. Let's continue. Chapter 8, Science and Spirituality, the New Alchemy of Knowing. For centuries, science and spirituality stood like estranged siblings, glaring at each other across a widening divide. One claimed authority over the measurable, the observable, the empirical. The other guarded the realm of meaning, mystery, and inner experience. But perhaps they were never meant to be at odds. Perhaps the conflict was always a misunderstanding of scope and language. Science speaking in equations, spirituality responding in metaphors, both describing different facets of the same cosmic reality. Today, as telescopes gaze deeper into the cosmos and particle accelerators unravel the subatomic world, science is beginning to echo ancient spiritual insights in ways it never anticipated. Nowhere is this convergence more startling than in the field of quantum physics. At the quantum level, particles do not behave like billiard balls following predictable trajectories. Instead, they exist as probabilities, waves of potential, collapsing into form only when observed. The famous double-slit experiment revealed this unsettling truth. The act of observation changes the behavior of particles. What does this mean? It suggests that consciousness, or at least observation, plays an active role in shaping reality. Theoretical physicists like David Bohm dared to take this further, proposing that reality consists of two intertwined layers. The implicate order, a hidden, interconnected field where everything exists in potential, and the explicate order, the manifest, observable universe that unfolds from this invisible matrix. Bohm's model, though born from physics, resonates deeply with ancient mystical traditions. The idea of a hidden field, an unseen order from which form emerges, finds echoes in the Hermetic principle of mentalism, in the Gnostic pleroma, and even in the Urantia concept of cosmic organization, where material reality unfolds within the purposeful designs of a living, intelligent universe. But the quantum conversation does not end with particles and fields. It extends into the realm of consciousness itself. Some scientists now propose that consciousness may not be a byproduct of brain activity at all. Instead, it may be non-local, existing beyond the constraints of time and space, with the brain acting more as a receiver or filter than as the origin point. This idea, once ridiculed in mainstream science, is gaining cautious traction in academic circles, thanks to research in fields like quantum consciousness theory and integrated neuroscience. Experiments on quantum entanglement, where two particles remain connected across vast distances, suggest that reality is more interconnected than previously imagined. Could human consciousness, too, be entangled with fields beyond the material? The conversation deepens when we turn our gaze inward, to the human brain, the seat of so many spiritual experiences. Neuroscience, with its growing interest in meditation and altered states, is mapping the biological correlates of mystical states once attributed solely to the divine or the transcendent. Functional MRI scans show that during deep meditation, certain brain regions, such as the prefrontal cortex and parietal lobes, undergo measurable changes. Monks in prolonged states of contemplation show increased gamma wave activity associated with heightened awareness, empathy, and joy. The default mode network, responsible for self-referential thinking and egoic identity, quiets during these states. This neurological silence often correlates with reports of ego dissolution, unity consciousness, and a sense of timeless presence. What ancient mystics described as union with the divine, modern neuroscience observes as neuroplastic shifts and altered brainwave patterns. But does mapping the brain's activity during these moments explain the experience? Or does it merely trace the biological footprints left by something larger moving through us? Even as neuroscience reveals the architecture of mystical states, it stops short of explaining what or who initiates the experience. This is where figures like Albert Einstein, Carl Sagan, and David Bohm provide bridges between disciplines. Einstein, though a physicist, often spoke in spiritual tones. He famously declared, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science." Carl Sagan, champion of scientific wonder, stood in awe before the cosmos, describing Earth as a pale blue floating in the vast cosmic sea, urging humanity to embrace both scientific responsibility and spiritual humility. David Bohm, perhaps the most openly metaphysical among them, saw no hard boundary between science and spirit. For him, the cosmos was not a machine, but an unfolding process of conscious order, alive and evolving. Each of these thinkers, though grounded in scientific method, allowed room for mystery. Each approached reality with curiosity and reverence. And yet, for all their insights, the cosmology presented in the Urantia Book takes this dialogue to an entirely different scale. As modern science continues to unravel the mechanics of the cosmos, it presents us with breathtaking models, expanding universes, black holes bending space and time, dark matter and dark energy composing most of what exists, and life emerging from primordial simplicity to staggering complexity. It is a narrative of evolution, driven by chance and governed by impersonal laws. The scientific cosmology speaks of cause and effect, of entropy and thermodynamics, of particles colliding and stars collapsing into singularities. It paints a universe magnificent in scale, but often silent in meaning. Beauty without purpose, order without intention, existence as an accident of physics. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface of this scientific narrative, an unease lingers. Why is there order at all? Why are the laws of physics so finely tuned for life? Why is there something rather than nothing? The more we peer into the fabric of reality, the more the universe begins to look less like a random explosion and more like an intentional architecture, delicately balanced and intricately interwoven. This is where the Urantia Book offers an audacious, cosmic reinterpretation of everything we thought we knew. According to the Urantia revelation, the universe is not a cold, indifferent mechanism, but a living, purposeful, and hierarchically organized system, extending from the most microscopic level to the superuniversal scale, all under the loving sovereignty of the Universal Father. Where science describes the Big Bang as the origin point, Urantia speaks of paradise, the eternal, unmoving center of all creation, surrounded by the central universe and encircled by 7 evolving superuniverses, each containing billions upon billions of inhabited worlds. The narrative shifts from randomness to design, from blind force to intentional artistry. Evolution, according to Urantia, is real, but it is guided, supervised, and inherently spiritual in trajectory. Life doesn't emerge by accident. It is seeded, monitored, and nurtured through countless celestial agencies, each playing its part in the universal symphony. Personality, far from being a fleeting byproduct of biological processes, is described as an eternal gift bestowed directly by the Universal Father, with the potential for infinite spiritual growth and eventual fusion with the divine fragment dwelling within. Urantia's cosmology doesn't deny scientific discovery, it reframes it. The natural laws observed by scientists are not arbitrary. They are expressions of cosmic consistency, established and upheld by spiritual agencies operating under divine ordinance. Where science sees probability, Urantia sees divine intentionality playing within the bounds of free will and cosmic order. Where neuroscience observes neural correlates of meditation and mystical states, Urantia describes the inner mechanics of how the thought adjuster interfaces with the human mind, gradually spiritualizing it, step by step. Where quantum physics struggles with the role of the observer, Urantia positions human consciousness as a necessary co-creative element within the universal unfolding, essential to the evolution of the Supreme Being, the experiential deity emerging from the accumulated experiences of all finite creatures across time and space. The most striking divergence between scientific cosmology and Urantia's vision lies not in the observation of facts, but in the interpretation of meaning. Science tells us what things are and how they behave. Urantia tells us why they exist and what their ultimate purpose is. One maps the terrain, the other reveals the destination. And yet, despite their differences, both are essential. Both offer tools for awakening. Both invite us deeper into the mystery. Perhaps the true alchemy of our time is this: to blend scientific inquiry with spiritual receptivity, allowing each to inform and refine the other. To let data sharpen wonder. To let faith ground speculation. To let reason and intuition walk together toward truth. As we prepare to turn the page, the next chapter will invite us to consider not the mechanics of a universe, but its heart, the nature of God, the absolute, and the enduring mystery of unity behind all diversity. If science helps us glimpse the mind of God through equations and observation, then spirituality helps us feel God's presence through love, awe, and inner transformation. And perhaps only when both are held in balance can we begin to grasp the full beauty of the cosmic story in which we live. Chapter 9, God, the Absolute, and the Mystery of Unity. To speak of God is to walk a paradoxical path. Every word becomes both bridge and barrier. Every definition opens a window and builds a wall at the same time. For how can a finite describe the infinite? How can the temporal mind contain even a fraction of the eternal? And yet we try. We always have. From the first flickers of human consciousness, we have named, sung, painted, feared, and loved that which we sense beyond the veil. Across the ages, cultures have reached upward with language shaped by geography, history, and spiritual temperament. In the Hebrew tradition, God appears first as YHWH, the Tetragrammaton, a name so sacred it was never spoken aloud, a breath-like word that hides as much as it reveals. YHWH is the God of covenant and history, the divine presence leading a people through deserts, wars, and revelations. A God both intimate and awe-inspiring, both near and ungraspable. In the mystical layers of Judaism, especially within Kabbalah, this same God becomes Ein Sof, the infinite, the unknowable light from whom the 10 Sephiroth emerge, giving structure to both creation and the spiritual journey of the soul. Further east, the Vedic sages of India contemplated Brahman, the unchanging, infinite, immanent, and transcendent reality that underlies all things. Brahman is not a being among beings, but being itself, beyond form, beyond concept, beyond even the duality of creator and creation. The Taoists, too, pointed toward this ineffable unity with poetic restraint. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, begins the Tao Te Ching. The Tao is not God in a personal sense, but the way, the underlying order and flow of existence, visible in the cycles of nature, the balance of opposites, the dance of yin and yang. The ancient Greeks, especially the Neoplatonists, spoke of the One, a principle so foundational it could only be described through negation. Not this, not that, beyond all categories, existing as pure potentiality, the source of all emanation and multiplicity. And within each of these traditions, we find the same silent admission. To define God is to risk diminishing God. This same humility saturates the Gnostic understanding of the divine. The Gnostics were acutely aware of the limitations of language and concept. They spoke of the unknown Father, the depth, the unfathomable source, a God so utterly beyond comprehension that even the highest celestial beings could only catch glimpses of divine radiance. In Gnostic cosmology, what we perceive as God in the lower worlds, the creator of the material universe, is often seen as a lesser, ignorant, or even flawed deity, a demiurge operating at a distance from the true source. For the Gnostics, true salvation was not about pleasing this lower God, but about awakening to the divine spark within, a fragment of the unknowable God hidden inside the human soul. The journey was one of inner ascent, breaking through layers of illusion and remembering one's true origin beyond all worlds. This theme, the unknowability of the absolute, resurfaces again and again across human spiritual history. Even modern philosophy wrestles with it, as thinkers like Wittgenstein reminded us that whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. But silence is only one path. Another is to redefine the way we speak, to approach the infinite not with final statements, but with open-ended questions and metaphors, each one a finger pointing toward a moon we can never fully touch. And here, the Urantia Book steps forward, not to resolve the paradox, but to offer a new language, a new cosmology, and perhaps most importantly, a new relationship to the infinite. If the Gnostics pointed toward the unknowability of the divine, the Urantia Book offers a daring and deeply personal counterbalance, that while the infinite cannot be fully comprehended, it can be intimately experienced. Urantia introduces us to the concept of the universal Father, the first source and center of all things, a being of infinite power and glory who nonetheless desires personal relationship with every individual soul. This is not a distant, indifferent prime mover or an abstract cosmic principle. This is a God who knows your name, who dwells within your mind as the thought adjuster, guiding, witnessing, and partnering with you through every moment of existence. The paradox deepens. God is both unapproachable and closer than your next breath. The Urantia text makes no attempt to reduce God to human categories, but it does emphasize that God's personality allows for authentic communion with each individual creature, regardless of their evolutionary stage or spiritual maturity. The Father, as described in Urantia, is both the source of infinite universes and the silent voice whispering inside your conscience, nudging you toward truth, beauty, and goodness. Where other traditions speak of climbing toward God through purification or intellectual attainment, Urantia proposes that God is already climbing toward us, embedded within the very fabric of our consciousness, waiting for our consent, our attention, our willingness to engage. And yet, even this loving intimacy does not resolve the fundamental mystery of the infinite. Here, philosophy raises its quiet, persistent objection. Can language ever capture what is fundamentally beyond all forms, categories, and definitions? The human mind, shaped by evolutionary needs, processes information through comparison, contrast, and relational logic. We understand light because we know dark. We know beginning because we've seen end. We define here because it is distinct from there. But God, the Absolute, exists beyond duality, beyond time, beyond space, beyond even the conceptual frameworks of existence and non-existence. To speak of God as loving is to use a human term for something that transcends human emotion. To call God personal is to use the closest language available for a relationship that exceeds our understanding of personhood. Philosophers like Kant warned of the categories of human thought, the inevitable filters through which we interpret reality. The noumenon, the thing in itself, remains forever beyond direct apprehension. Ludwig Wittgenstein took it further. The limits of my language mean the limits of my world, meaning that the very words we use confine the scope of what we can comprehend. And yet, we speak anyway. We write, pray, meditate, sing. We reach for metaphors, Father, Source, Light, Presence, not because they fully define God, but because they allow us to stand at the edge of the infinite with at least a small vocabulary of longing. Perhaps the purpose of language in the spiritual journey is not to capture God, but to point toward God, to create openings in the mind through which personal experience can flow, to give shape to the ineffable, even if only temporarily, knowing that each word will one day dissolve into deeper silence. The Urantia teachings embrace this paradox fully. They present elaborate cosmologies, complex hierarchies of celestial beings, detailed descriptions of universe organization, and yet, in the end, they bring the reader back to a simple, transcendent truth, that God is both the absolute center of all that is and the gentle companion of your unfolding soul. In the interplay between cosmic scale and personal intimacy, between philosophical abstraction and daily experience, we find ourselves not with final answers, but with something perhaps more valuable, a living relationship with mystery. And as we prepare to enter the next chapter, this relationship with the infinite will find its human echo in the call for universal fraternity, ethical responsibility, and spiritual compassion, a movement from personal awakening toward collective evolution. Because knowing God is never a solitary act. It inevitably leads us back to each other. Chapter 10, Universal Brotherhood, from philosophical ethics to cosmic consciousness. There's a quiet revolution that begins inside every human heart. The awakening to the reality that we are not alone, not in suffering, not in joy, and certainly not in destiny. We live intertwined lives, sharing air, earth, language, and hope. And yet, for much of human history, ethics, the framework by which we define how to treat one another, has been debated in ivory towers and philosophical circles, often disconnected from the living, breathing world of daily relationship. The great philosophers, though, never intended ethics to remain abstract. Immanuel Kant, with his categorical imperative, challenged us to act only according to principles that could be universalized. That is, to treat each person as an end in themselves, never as a means to an end. Behind Kant's dense language was a moral clarity. Every human being possesses inherent dignity, simply by virtue of existing. Centuries later, Emmanuel Levinas brought ethics into the realm of encounter. For Levinas, ethics was not a set of rules, but a response to the face of the other. When we stand before another human being, especially one who is vulnerable, their very presence calls us into responsibility. The face of the other breaks through our self-centered narratives and demands recognition. Martin Buber, with his timeless work, I and Thou, took this even further. He spoke of two modes of relationship, I-it and I-thou. In the I-it relationship, we see others as objects, things to be used, evaluated, categorized. In the I-thou relationship, we meet others as subjects, as living, breathing realities worthy of love, attention, and reverence. Buber's insight was simple but revolutionary. God is most directly encountered in the space between I and thou. In each authentic meeting with another, we glimpse the sacred. Yet philosophy alone, however profound, often struggles to translate this ethical vision into lived practice, especially in a world driven by competition, fear, and scarcity. This is where spirituality steps in, not to replace philosophy, but to breathe life into its concepts. The Urantia Book takes the ethical imperative and lifts it into a cosmic context. Fraternity, according to Urantia, is not merely a social ideal. It is a structural reality of the universe. We are quite literally children of the same universal Father. Our differences of race, culture, language, or belief are surface level. Beneath them lies a deeper unity, a shared spiritual heritage. Urantia teaches that the universe is relational at its core, and that personality itself is designed for cooperative growth and mutual service. To love one another is not an optional virtue. It is the fulfillment of cosmic law, the manifestation of divine will and finite reality. And yet, love, in this context, is more than sentiment. It is action. It is seeing the stranger as brother, the enemy as fellow traveler, the marginalized as reflections of ourselves. This principle finds resonance in other spiritual traditions as well. In Mahayana Buddhism, the Bodhisattva ideal calls the awakened one not to retreat into personal bliss, but to remain within the suffering world, working tirelessly for the liberation of all beings. In Christian mysticism, the Christ within speaks of the birth of divine compassion in the human heart, a love that transcends judgment and embraces even the unworthy. In countless indigenous teachings, humanity is understood as part of a sacred web, where to harm one is to harm all. Service becomes the natural outflow of true awakening. It is not something added to the spiritual path. It is the path. If universal brotherhood is the ethical and spiritual ideal, the natural question arises: how do we embody it in the messiness of daily life? Grand ideas are inspiring, but they become transformative only when they find expression in simple, human gestures. When philosophy and cosmology descend from the abstract and take root in the soil of action. The first step toward living universal brotherhood is cultivating radical presence. To truly see others, not as background characters in our personal story, but as conscious beings on their own sacred journey. This means slowing down enough to notice the humanity in the cashier's tired eyes, the struggle behind a stranger's frustration, the quiet sadness beneath a friend's distracted smile. This presence is not passive. It invites a subtle shift, from reacting to responding, from judging to understanding, from assuming to inquiring. The second step is conscious empathy, the deliberate act of placing oneself in another's emotional landscape, even for a moment. Empathy is not agreement. It is not about dissolving boundaries or abandoning discernment. It is about acknowledging the shared vulnerability that comes with being human. In this way, empathy becomes a spiritual practice, a mirror of the universal Father's care for each being. The Urantia Book speaks often of service-motivated love, a love that does not wait for perfect circumstances or emotional reward, but acts from principle and inner alignment with cosmic values. To help someone without expectation of recognition or return, to forgive not because the other deserves it, but because forgiveness is how the soul keeps itself aligned with divine grace. To give when it costs something. These are acts of spiritual brotherhood in motion. The Bodhisattva path in Buddhism captures this same spirit with striking clarity. The Bodhisattva vows not to seek final liberation until all sentient beings have also found their way to freedom. This is not spiritual martyrdom, but a profound recognition of interconnected destiny. Similarly, the Christian vision of the Christ within invites each person to become a living channel for love, healing, and reconciliation. The mystical realization is simple yet profound. We do not just seek God, we become instruments through which God acts in the world. In practical terms, this may mean speaking kindly to someone who is difficult to love. It may mean choosing patience over irritation in traffic. It may mean listening, truly listening, when someone is in pain, even when our instinct is to offer quick solutions. It may mean standing for justice when silence would be easier. But fraternity is not limited to human interactions. It extends outward to the environment, to animals, to future generations. To live in universal brotherhood is to feel responsibility for the well-being of the planet and all its life forms. The Urantia perspective deepens this further by placing our ethical responsibility within a cosmic continuum. Our daily choices, however small, are threads woven into the larger tapestry of universal evolution. What we do here, on this small, blue planet, echoes in dimensions we cannot yet perceive. Service, then, is not a duty imposed from outside. It is the natural flowering of a soul that remembers its origin and recognizes its belonging within the family of all creation. And perhaps this is the most beautiful irony. The more we engage with others, the more we give, forgive, and serve, the more we come home to ourselves. Because to love others is to remember who we truly are. Fragments of the same source. Pilgrims walking different paths toward the same light. And as we transition to the next chapter, we will explore how this realization, this lived fraternity, prepares the soul for the great spiritual culmination, the evolutionary ascent toward the universal Father, the return to the source from which we came. Chapter 11. The Evolution of Planetary Consciousness. Every age has its spiritual signature, a collective vibration that shapes how humanity perceives itself, the cosmos, and the divine. Once, spirituality was tribal, woven into the rhythms of nature and the cycles of the land. Then came institutionalized religion, with its temples, dogmas, and hierarchies, offering structure and community, but often limiting personal experience in favor of external authority. Now something new is stirring. Across continents and cultures, individuals are awakening to a longing that traditional systems struggle to satisfy. A yearning not just for belief, but for direct experience. Not just for doctrines, but for inner transformation. The age of inherited faith is giving way to a spirituality of encounter, where dogma is replaced by dialogue, ritual by reflection, and blind acceptance by conscious exploration. Sociologists describe this as the rise of post-institutional spirituality, a global movement toward personal connection with the sacred, unbound by rigid frameworks. Meditation centers flourish where cathedrals empty. Interfaith gatherings replace denominational rivalries. Silence and mindfulness become as sacred as hymns and sermons. And this shift is not a rejection of the sacred past, but an evolution of how humanity relates to the divine. We are witnessing the gradual emergence of a planetary spirituality, one that honors diverse traditions while transcending sectarian boundaries. This collective shift did not arrive unannounced. Visionaries throughout the 20th century sensed its coming. Among them, Teilhard of Chardin, a Jesuit priest and paleontologist, offered one of the most daring and beautiful models for humanity's spiritual evolution. Teilhard proposed that just as life evolved from molecules to cells, from organisms to conscious beings, so too is human consciousness itself evolving. toward what he called the new sphere. The new sphere, in Teilhard's vision, is a sphere of collective human thought, awareness, and intentionality encircling the planet, an invisible but growing field of interconnected minds. For Teilhard, this was not mystical poetry, but scientific and spiritual inevitability. He foresaw a time when technology, communication, and shared moral vision would weave humanity into a single global mind, a step toward what he named the Omega Point, a unification of consciousness with the divine source. Today, as the internet links billions of people, as social movements cross borders in seconds, and as collective meditations for peace happen globally, Teilhard's new sphere feels less like a distant theory and more like an unfolding reality. But the question remains, what direction will this collective consciousness take? Will it spiral toward materialism, distraction, and division? Or will it awaken to its deeper spiritual potential? This is where the Urantia Book's vision of planetary evolution offers profound insight. According to Urantia cosmology, planetary development moves through defined spiritual epochs, dispensational ages, each marked by increasing levels of social cooperation, ethical maturity, and spiritual awareness. Our world, Urantia, is still in the early, struggling phases of this journey, what the book calls the age of spiritual adolescence, marked by conflict, material obsession, and fragmented moral vision. But the promise of the future is clear. Over time, and through both human choice and divine guidance, the planet is destined to enter the ages of light and life. In these future epochs, war will be a memory. Poverty and ignorance will recede. Global governance will prioritize the common good over national interests. Art, science, and spirituality will work together in service of truth, beauty, and goodness. And most importantly, individual God consciousness will become the norm, not the exception. This is not utopian fantasy. Urantia describes it as the natural outcome of evolutionary progression, accelerated by spiritual agencies, human free will, and the quiet work of the thought adjusters within every soul. But for this future to manifest, it requires something now, a shift in how we live and choose today. It calls for a new kind of ethics, one not limited to interpersonal morality, but expanded to planetary responsibility. And this is where spiritual ecology and global ethics become part of the conversation. As humanity edges closer to this threshold of planetary awakening, new forms of responsibility emerge. Responsibility not just to one another, but to the planet itself. The Earth, long treated as backdrop or resource, is now being recognized as a living system, deeply interwoven with human destiny. This recognition is more than environmental awareness. It is spiritual ecology, a view of the world that sees rivers, forests, oceans, and skies not merely as ecosystems, but as expressions of the same cosmic intelligence that animates our own consciousness. The rain that falls on distant continents, the migration patterns of birds, the silent growth of ancient trees, all of it participates in the same universal symphony described in the Urantia cosmology. When the Urantia book speaks of cosmic interconnectedness, it is not referring only to celestial beings and distant universes. It is speaking, too, of the very soil beneath our feet, the air in our lungs, the intricate dance of life forms that sustain and surround us. This is why spiritual awakening today cannot remain internal or isolated. It must inevitably manifest as planetary stewardship. We are not passive inhabitants of Earth. We are co-creators, called to participate in the healing and evolution of the planet as an extension of our own soul growth. This is where the emerging field of global ethics finds its spiritual foundation. Philosophers, theologians, and scientists now speak openly about a universal moral framework, a set of principles that transcends cultural boundaries and speaks to the shared dignity of all life. Concepts like human rights, sustainability, intergenerational responsibility, and ecological justice are no longer the domain of activists alone. They are becoming central to any serious conversation about the future of civilization. And at the heart of this ethical shift lies a simple, ancient truth now reawakened. What we do to the least of these, the poor, the marginalized, the earth itself, we do to ourselves. This echoes the spiritual principle articulated by the Christ, the compassion of the Bodhisattva, the Gnostic call for unity, and the Urantia revelation of universal kinship. Living in alignment with this planetary ethic is not about perfection or grand gestures. It is about the small, daily decisions. To choose sustainability over convenience. To practice kindness even when it's inconvenient. To speak for those who have no voice, whether human or non-human. To live as though every action ripples outward, because it does. Teilhard to Chardin's vision of the new sphere, Urantia's prophecy of the ages of light and life, and the contemporary calls for spiritual ecology all point toward the same horizon. A planet where individual awakening becomes collective evolution, where spirituality and science, ethics and ecology, personal choice and cosmic destiny converge. But this future is not guaranteed. It is potential, waiting, dependent on the conscious, sustained decisions of individuals like you, like me, like all of us. And as we prepare to enter the next chapter, the focus will shift from the collective back to the personal, because all planetary change begins with inner transformation. We will explore the sacred process of surrender, the necessary inner letting go that allows the soul to merge more fully with the divine will. Because before we change the world, we must first be willing to change ourselves. Chapter 12, Final Synthesis, From Philosophy to Sacred Encounter. There comes a moment, after long reflection, when the mind grows quiet, not from exhaustion, but from reverence, when words, so carefully chosen across pages and chapters, begin to dissolve. And what remains is presence. Looking back over this journey, we have traveled across landscapes, both inner and cosmic. We began with the primal question of identity. Who are we? Tracing its echoes through philosophy, psychology, and sacred texts. We explored suffering, not as punishment, but as initiation. We asked whether reality itself is illusion or purpose, and we traced the outlines of consciousness, peeling back layers of ego, soul, and spirit. We walked the corridors of the mystery schools, studied the Hermetic laws, stood in the shadow of Gnostic unknowability, and listened for the thought adjuster's silent voice. We embraced science, not as adversary, but as partner, seeing in quantum fields and neurological maps reflections of ancient spiritual truths. We contemplated God, the absolute, the unnameable, the intimate, and we expanded our gaze to encompass universal brotherhood, ethical responsibility, and the collective awakening of planetary consciousness. Now, at this final threshold, one truth stands clear. There has never been a separation between philosophy and spirituality, between reason and faith. They are two languages attempting to describe the same encounter. Reason sharpens our perception. Faith opens the heart to mystery. Together, they create a fuller map of reality. Philosophy teaches us how to question, how to think critically, how to navigate complexity without surrendering to dogma or fear. Spirituality teaches us how to surrender, not as defeat, but as the ultimate act of trust. It invites us to let go of our need for control, to lean into the unknown, and to allow grace to meet us where intellect cannot go. It is here, at this intersection, that the real work begins to become a conscious co-creator within the universal plan. This is not poetic metaphor. It is a living reality. The Urantia teachings, alongside countless mystical traditions, remind us that our decisions, our intentions, our willingness to love and serve shape the very fabric of the evolving universe. Every act of kindness sends ripples through dimensions we cannot yet perceive. Every moral choice strengthens the supreme. Every moment of forgiveness, every step toward compassion, every silent prayer feeds the unfolding of cosmic destiny. You, sitting here now, reading these words, are part of that unfolding. Your doubts and your faith, your failures and your triumphs, your questions and your deepest longings. All of it is sacred material in the divine experiment of becoming. The journey through these chapters has not been linear, nor could it be. True understanding unfolds in spirals, where each new insight sends us back to revisit old questions with deeper eyes. We have traced the arc from intellectual inquiry to mystical experience, from the Stoics' rational discipline to the Gnostics' inner knowing, from scientific observation to cosmic revelation. We've seen that the human search for meaning is neither a philosophical exercise nor a religious ritual alone. It is a living dialogue between the mind that seeks and the mystery that calls. At every stage, one thread has remained constant: the necessity of integration. Reason without faith becomes sterile analysis. Faith without reason risks becoming blind devotion. But together, when thought bows to wonder and belief is tested by inquiry, a new kind of knowing emerges. A knowing that is both critical and compassionate, both grounded and transcendent, both human and divine. And now, standing at this inner threshold, the invitation becomes clear: to live as a conscious co-creator within the unfolding universe. This does not mean abandoning the material world for some lofty spiritual retreat. It means engaging more fully, with more clarity, more love, more responsibility. It means seeing the face of the divine not only in meditative silence, but in the stranger on the street, in the challenges of your daily work, in the quiet moments of choice that define the soul's trajectory. To be a co-creator is to participate actively in the moral, emotional, and spiritual evolution of reality itself. It is to become the hands, the voice, the heart through which the universal Father continues the work of creation within time and space. The Urantia Book calls this partnership with the divine, a partnership built not on fear or obligation, but on trust and willingness. You do not need to be perfect to begin this work. You need only to be sincere. The universe does not demand flawless wisdom. It asks for openness, for the next brave step, for the willingness to become a vessel for love, truth, and transformation. And so, as this chapter closes, let this not be an ending, but a beginning. Wherever you are on your path, whether standing at the first awakening or deep into your inner pilgrimage, remember, you are part of something vast, beautiful, and eternally unfolding. The stars above, the soil beneath, the thoughts within, and the spirit beyond, all are conspiring toward your awakening. The next step is yours. And if this journey has touched something within you, if these words have resonated with your heart and sparked new questions or longings, I invite you to share your experience. Leave a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Share this video with those you love, someone who might need this message today. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel. Every day, we bring new reflections to nourish the soul and inspire your path. Because awakening is not a solitary act. It is a collective rising. And together, we are building a new consciousness, one breath, one choice, one moment at a time.